Hi there. Welcome back to Haunting Veils. In a grand house draped in mourning, a widow wears her grief like silk and her secrets like perfume. The whispers begin when she marries again, far too soon and far too quietly. The widow's second husband is a tale of love reborn from ashes, but not without a price. When tragedy strikes once more, the line between sympathy and suspicion vanishes. Hercule Poirot is called to untangle a web spun from passion, jealousy, and carefully hidden lies. Every smile conceals intent. Every memory hides motive. And in this game of second chances, one truth remains. The past never stays buried. Stay with us till the very end, for this widow's secret may outlive every man she's ever loved. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Haunting Veils, where every story hides a heartbeat in the dark. Chapter 1. The Wedding Shadow. The rain had been falling since morning, soft at first, then harder, like the sky itself could sense what was about to unfold. The small English village of Willingford sat tucked between rolling hills and fog-drenched lanes, the kind of place where whispers traveled faster than the wind. On this gray afternoon, the villagers gathered at St. Matthew's Church for what was meant to be a joyful occasion. The wedding of Mrs. Clara Whitby, the widow of the late Colonel Edward Whitby, to a man named Thomas Reed. No one said it aloud, but the air was heavy with unease. Colonel Whitby had died just 2 years before, and though Clara's mourning had seemed sincere, the speed of her remarriage left a bitter taste among those who had admired her loyalty. Still, she looked radiant that day, dressed in ivory silk, her face calm, her eyes distant. Some said she looked too calm. In the fourth pew, Hercule Poirot sat quietly, hands folded over his walking stick, eyes narrowed not in judgment, but in observation. He was not there by invitation, not exactly. The late colonel had once been an acquaintance, a man of discipline and secrets. And when Poirot received a letter from the colonel's solicitor a week ago, hinting at unfinished matters regarding the estate, he decided to attend the ceremony unannounced. The church bell tolled. The organ began its solemn tune. Thomas Reed stood at the altar, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of charm that could be bought or borrowed. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. As Clara approached, Poirot studied him. There was something rehearsed in his expression, like an actor uncertain of his next line. When the vows were spoken, the rain stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds and poured through the stained-glass windows, casting streaks of crimson and gold across the aisle. It looked beautiful, almost too beautiful, like a moment staged for a photograph that would later haunt its subjects. That evening, the reception was held at Whitby Manor, the grand, ivy-covered estate that had belonged to the colonel's family for generations. Poirot arrived discreetly, mingling among the guests. Laughter and music filled the hall, but underneath it all, there was tension, the kind that hums in the silence between violin notes. Clara moved gracefully from guest to guest, her new husband at her side. She thanked the vicar, the caterers, the neighbors who had known her since girlhood. Her voice was steady, yet her hand trembled slightly when she lifted her glass. Poirot saw it. He saw everything. The way Thomas's gaze lingered on the expensive silverware, the way he spoke more to the servants than to his bride, and the faint glance of relief that passed between Clara and her maid when he left her side. As night deepened, the festivities waned. Guests began to leave, their whispers carried by the wind. Poirot stayed, watching. He found himself beside Inspector Arthur Gresham, a broad, honest man who had dealt with the Whitbys before. "Didn't expect to see you here, sir," Gresham said quietly. "Thought you'd retired." "Retirement," Poirot replied softly, "is merely the illusion that one has finished learning." Gresham smiled faintly. "Well, keep your eyes open. Something about this whole affair feels wrong." The colonel's will the estate, it's all too tidy. And this Reed fellow, he's got charm, but I've seen that kind before. Before Poirot could respond, a crash echoed from the upper landing, the sound of glass breaking. Then came a scream. Guests froze. Poirot and Gresham ran toward the staircase. At the top stood Clara, pale and trembling, pointing toward the study door. He's hurt, she cried. They burst in. Thomas Reed lay slumped over the desk, a shattered decanter beside him. His skin was ashen, his lips blue. The smell of brandy and almonds hung in the air, unmistakable. Poison, Poirot said quietly. Someone gasped. Another voice whispered, not again. For the second time in 2 years, a husband had died inside Whitby Manor. By midnight, the manor was sealed. The guests were questioned, the servants gathered. The celebration turned into an interrogation. Poirot remained calm, studying every face, every movement. Clara sat on the couch, motionless, her hands clasped tight in her lap. I didn't touch the drink, she said, her voice hollow. He poured himself. He was laughing one moment, and the next, she trailed off, staring at nothing. Gresham looked at Poirot. Could be suicide. Poirot shook his head. A man does not poison his own glass at his wedding feast, Mon. He caught himself, almost slipping into his old habit of French phrasing. No, this was no accident, Inspector, but I cannot yet say whose hand guided the glass. He walked to the desk. The brandy bottle was open, half empty. A faint residue clung to the rim. Cyanide, I think, he murmured. But how was it administered? No one else drank. No smell of almonds until after the fall. He examined the scene in silence. The study was richly decorated. Dark oak furniture, heavy curtains, the scent of old books and polish. A framed photograph of Colonel Whitby hung over the fireplace. Poirot's gaze lingered there. The colonel had been a soldier, proud and stoic, yet there was something oddly watchful in his eyes, even from the photograph. The clock struck 1. Poirot turned to Gresham. The poison was not meant for Thomas Reed alone, he said quietly. It is a message. A message. Gresham frowned. From who? Poirot looked at the widow. That, my friend, is what we must discover. For if I am not mistaken, this house hides more ghosts than graves. The next morning brought fog thick enough to swallow the gardens whole. The police remained at the manor, gathering statements. Word of the tragedy had spread across the village. Some pitied Clara, others whispered that she had done it, just as she'd done with her first husband. Poirot, however, was not content with gossip. He began to walk the estate grounds alone. Behind the manor stood the colonel's old greenhouse, locked since his death. The glass panes were clouded with dust. Inside, the plants had long withered, their labels faded. But Poirot noticed one peculiar thing. On the table near the entrance sat a small wooden box marked private. He opened it. Inside were several vials, carefully sealed, each labeled in the colonel's handwriting. Arsenic, strychnine, cyanide. Poirot stared at them in silence. Curious, he murmured. The colonel was a collector of poisons, and now the same method claims another life under his roof. A soft voice came from behind him. He studied them, Clara said, standing in the doorway. He said it was for self-defense, to understand how enemies think. But I hated it. I wanted to destroy that box after he died. Yet you did not, Poirot said gently. She looked down. I couldn't bring myself to. It felt like destroying a part of him. Poirot regarded her closely. Her grief seemed genuine, yet her eyes betrayed something else. Fear, perhaps, or guilt of another kind. Tell me, Mrs. Reed, he said softly. How did you meet your husband? Her voice faltered. He was a friend of Edward's. He came to visit after the funeral. He was kind, attentive. He said he wanted to help me recover from my loss. And the marriage? Poirot asked. It was his idea. He said people would talk if we didn't marry. I thought it would quiet the rumors. Poirot nodded slowly. And did it? She looked away. No, it made them worse. That night, Poirot returned to the study. He sat in silence, his eyes moving from the desk to the fireplace, to the photograph above it. Then he noticed something he hadn't before, a small scratch on the frame. He pulled it closer and saw that it concealed a hinge. The portrait swung open to reveal a hidden safe. Inside, Poirot found several documents, letters, and one sealed envelope addressed to Clara Whitby. He didn't open it. Instead, he waited until morning and handed it to her. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. She read silently, her lips moving, her face draining of color. When she looked up, tears filled her eyes. "It's from Edward," she whispered. "He wrote this before he died." He knew. Knew what? Poirot asked. She handed him the letter. The words were few but clear. "My dearest Clara, if ever another man comes to you with charm and concern after my death, beware him. He seeks what I once protected. The truth lies in the blue locket. Trust no one but the man who asks about it." Poirot's gaze lifted slowly. "The blue locket?" Clara nodded. "I have it. It was my wedding gift from him. I've never opened it. It doesn't even have a key." Poirot stood. "Then, Mrs. Reed, I suggest we open it now. For within that locket may lie not only your husband's secret, but the reason 2 men have died in this house." The chapter closes as Poirot takes the locket in his hands, turning it toward the light. Its surface gleams faintly, cold and metallic. From the outside, it seems harmless, yet inside, he senses the heart of the mystery pulsing quietly, waiting to be revealed. Outside, the rain begins again, soft, rhythmic, relentless. And within Whitby Manor, the shadow of the wedding day grows darker still. Chapter 2: The House of Silent Rooms. The rain eased by morning, but the house felt heavier than before. The windows of Whitby Manor were misted over, and the corridors carried an echo that did not belong to footsteps but to memory itself. Poirot stood in the drawing room beside the hearth, examining the blue locket in the palm of his hand. It was delicate, oval-shaped, rimmed with silver, the kind of trinket made to hold love, not secrets. A faint engraving traced the initials CW across its surface. The clasp was sealed shut, no visible keyhole, no hinge to pry. It was meant to stay closed. Clara watched from the armchair, her fingers clutched around a cup of untouched tea. Her eyes were ringed with sleeplessness. "He gave it to me on our first anniversary," she said softly. "Said it was to keep my heart safe. I never questioned it. Edward was a man of mystery, even in love." Poirot turned the locket over once more. "And yet he left this warning. The truth lies in the blue locket. It is clear he meant for it to be found, but not easily." He set it gently on the table and turned to Inspector Gresham, who had been pacing near the door. "Have you had the laboratory confirm the cause of death?" Gresham nodded grimly. "Cyanide, no doubt about it. And it wasn't self-administered. The rim of the decanter had traces of the stuff. Someone tampered with it." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. "And only one glass was poured?" "Just the one," Gresham replied. "Mr. Reed poured it himself. But here's the thing. The fingerprints on the bottle aren't his. They're smudged, but definitely smaller." Poirot's eyes drifted toward Clara. She didn't flinch, only stared into the fire as though it might answer for her. "Mrs. Reed," he said gently, "did you pour your husband's drink?" Her voice came thin and strained. "No, I was dancing when he went to the study. He said he needed to check something in the colonel's papers. I didn't follow." Poirot looked to Gresham. Then someone else entered the room before him. Gresham grunted. "We questioned the staff. No one admits to being near the study at that time." "Ah," Poirot said softly, "which means one of them is lying." That afternoon, the manor grew quieter. The guests had gone, the constables stood guard, and only the faint hum of the wind filled the halls. Poirot began to move room by room, taking note of the smallest details. The placement of portraits, the half-burnt candles, the books left open on side tables. In the corridor leading to the late colonel's bedroom, he stopped. The floorboards creaked under his shoes, but another sound followed, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking from inside a wall. He pressed his ear against the paneling. Silence. Then a soft creak again. "Inspector," he called quietly, "bring your torch." They searched the hallway until Poirot's hand brushed a small irregularity along the wallpaper, a seam too narrow to notice unless one looked closely. He pulled at it, revealing a concealed latch. A door swung inward, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. Gresham exhaled. "A secret passage. Every cursed house in England seems to have one." Poirot's voice was calm. "Yes, but this one is not for smuggling wine or hiding lovers. It is built for watching." They descended slowly. The air grew colder, thicker. At the bottom, the passage opened into a small stone chamber lined with dust and cobwebs. A single chair stood facing a thin slit in the wall, a viewing slit that looked directly into the study above. "Someone sat here," Gresham muttered, his voice echoing. "Watch the room like a stage." Poirot ran his finger along the chair's back. A thin layer of dust had been disturbed, recently, and not long ago, he said, perhaps on the wedding night. He turned and found a box on the floor. Inside it were a few personal items, a silver lighter, a handkerchief embroidered with initials, T.R. Gresham frowned. "Thomas Reed's?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "Look closer. The stitching is uneven. That is not the work of a tailor. It is a copy, an imitation. Someone wanted to leave the impression that Mr. Reed used this place." "Then who did?" "That," Poirot said softly, "is the question that will open this locket." At dusk, Poirot requested that the household gather in the drawing room. The fire glowed, low and orange. The staff stood nervously near the door. The housekeeper, the gardener, the cook, the maid, and the chauffeur. Clara sat in her chair, hands clasped tight around the blue locket. Poirot looked at each face carefully. "We are gathered," he said calmly, "to prevent another death. For I believe this manor has not yet finished its cruel work." The servants exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot continued. "The poison that killed Mr. Reed did not come from outside the house. It came from within. The colonel kept a collection of poisons in his greenhouse. That much we know. But one vial, cyanide, is missing." He turned to the housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway. "When did you last see it?" Her voice trembled. "Not since the colonel's time, sir. The box was locked." Poirot nodded. "And yet someone unlocked it. Someone who knew the colonel's habits and his keys." He stepped closer to Clara. "Tell me, Mrs. Reed, were your late husband's personal keys?" She hesitated. "In the study drawer. Or they should be." Poirot gestured for Gresham to check. The inspector returned moments later, holding a keyring, but one key was missing. Poirot's gaze softened. The key to the greenhouse. Clara's breath caught. "You think I think," Poirot said gently, "that whoever took that key wanted us to think you did." The night deepened. Poirot sat alone in the library, the locket before him on the desk. He turned it over once more, feeling the weight of time in its small frame. Then he noticed something, a faint line along the edge, thinner than a hair. He pressed it with his nail. The locket clicked, then split open silently. Inside was not a photograph or lock of hair, but a thin piece of folded paper. Poirot unfolded it carefully. It was a letter, written in the colonel's firm, precise hand. "To whoever finds this, the man who calls himself Thomas Reed is not who he appears to be. He once served under me in India under another name. He betrayed his company and stole from his men. I found the evidence and kept it safe. He swore he would return for it. If I am found dead by unnatural cause, he is the reason. If another dies by poison, Look not to my wife, but to those who knew both of us. The truth lies buried in the West Wing." Poirot folded the paper slowly, his expression unreadable. "So, the Colonel foresaw it," he murmured. "A crime born of vengeance, not love." He rose and called for Inspector Gresham. Together they crossed to the West Wing, the part of the house long closed since the Colonel's death. The air there was stale, the curtains drawn, the room silent. Dust clung to every surface. Poirot entered the Colonel's study, untouched since the funeral. On the desk lay old ledgers, medals, and a single locked drawer. Gresham forced it open. Inside were letters, old military correspondences, and a packet of documents marked read, "Thomas, formerly Andrew Cross." Gresham whistled. A false name. He changed it. Poirot nodded. Indeed, he reinvented himself to escape the past, and married the widow of the man who could expose him. Then the poison. Poirot held up a hand. Was meant to silence Clara before she could discover this truth. But the hand that poured it may not have been his. He examined the papers more closely. Among them was a recent letter, dated just weeks before the wedding, from an unknown sender. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate. "If you marry her, you risk all. The Colonel's fortune, the secret, the papers, they belong to me now." Poirot looked up. "There is another player in this game, Inspector. Someone who knew Reed's true identity and used it to control him." Gresham frowned. "Who?" Poirot turned toward the window, where lightning flickered faintly beyond the curtains. "Someone who has lived in this house too long to be seen. Someone who watches from the shadows. The housekeeper, perhaps, or the maid. But one among them knew Thomas Reed before Clara ever did." Later that night, Poirot found Clara alone in the gallery, staring at her reflection in a window pane. "He lied to me," she whispered. "He said he'd love me. But it was all a performance, wasn't it?" Poirot spoke softly. "A performance, yes, but not one without feeling. I believe he did love you, in his way. But greed and fear are cruel masters." She turned to him, eyes wet. "Then who killed him?" Poirot looked past her, toward the corridor where the shadow of Mrs. Holloway lingered briefly before vanishing down the stairs. He said quietly, "That is the question I intend to answer before dawn." The clock in the hall struck midnight. The rain had stopped, but the air felt charged, as if the house itself held its breath. In Whitby Manor, every sound mattered. The creak of a door, the whisper of cloth, the faint echo of movement behind walls. And in that silence, Poirot knew the murderer was not finished. For when a crime begins in love and ends in poison, it seldom ends with just one death. Chapter 3. The Truth Beneath the Vows. The storm that had lingered over Whitby Manor finally broke apart before dawn. Gray light seeped through the curtains, and the air smelled of cold stone and wet leaves. The house was silent, too silent. Poirot had not slept. He remained in the Colonel's study, reading through the papers that exposed Thomas Reed's double life. The evidence was undeniable. Reed, once known as Andrew Cross, had betrayed his unit in India, stolen from the men he commanded, and fled England under a new name. The Colonel had discovered the truth years later and had kept it locked away, waiting. Now both men were dead. Inspector Gresham entered quietly, rubbing the fatigue from his eyes. "We've questioned the staff again. They all claim they were in their quarters during the toast. No one saw anyone near the study except the maid, Elsie. She said she heard a noise, but was too afraid to look." Poirot looked up. "Ah, yes. Fear, the most common mask of guilt." He rose, walked to the window, and drew the curtain aside. "Inspector, this house has too many places to hide secrets. We have found passages and safes and letters, but still we lack the simplest answer. Who placed the poison in the glass?" Gresham sighed. "It has to be one of them. But which?" Poirot's gaze drifted toward the gardens. "The answer my friend, is always where the silence is loudest. By noon, the household was gathered once more in the drawing room. The air was heavy with dread. The fire burned low, and the only sound was the crackle of wood. Clara sat at the far end, pale and hollow-eyed. The servants stood in a line. Mrs. Holloway, the housekeeper, the gardener, Mr. Fielding, the maid Elsie, and the chauffeur Davis. Poirot stood by the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began quietly, "we are met again not to mourn, but to understand. 2 deaths have darkened this house. The first, Colonel Whitby, ruled as natural. The second, Thomas Reed, ruled as murder. But both deaths were born of the same secret." He turned to Clara. "Madam, the colonel wrote that you should trust only the man who asked about the blue locket. I asked. You trusted. And through that trust, we have opened the door that your husband's killer tried so hard to keep shut." Clara swallowed, her hands trembling. Poirot lifted the folded paper from the locket. "This letter tells us that the man you married under the name Thomas Reed was a thief and a traitor. He returned here not for love, but for the evidence your first husband left behind. Yet someone else already knew his secret and feared what would happen when you discovered it." He looked at Mrs. Holloway. "You, madam, served both men for years. You were loyal to the colonel, devoted, protective. Tell me, why did you hide his safe behind the portrait instead of destroying it, as he instructed?" The housekeeper stiffened. "I didn't hide it, sir. I only followed orders." "Whose orders?" Poirot asked softly. Her silence filled the room. Poirot continued. "When Colonel Whitby died, you found the papers naming Andrew Cross. You realized that the fortune left to Mrs. Whitby could be threatened if those papers became public. And then came a visitor, Thomas Reed. You recognized him at once." Her eyes widened. "No." "Yes," Poirot said gently. "You recognized the man who had betrayed your own son in India. He served under him, did he not? Your son, Private Holloway, executed for the theft that Andrew Cross committed." A gasp rippled through the room. Mrs. Holloway's hands shook. "My boy was innocent. They hanged him for Cross's crime. The colonel knew it, but could never prove it. And so," Poirot continued softly, "when Cross returned under a new name and courted the widow, you saw your chance for revenge." She turned toward Clara, tears streaming. "I didn't mean to kill him that night. I only meant to frighten him, to make him confess what he'd done. I slipped the poison into the decanter hours before the toast. I thought it would mix too weakly to harm. I wanted the taste, the smell, to remind him of what he'd done to my boy. But he drank too much." Her voice broke. "I swear to you, I didn't mean for him to die." The room was still except for the crackle of the fire. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment, as if in prayer. When he spoke again, his tone was solemn. "Justice, madam, is a cruel thing when it comes by mistake, but has found its way, nonetheless. You avenged one innocent man by killing another who was guilty of his own sins. The circle is complete." Inspector Gresham stepped forward, his expression heavy. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm afraid you'll have to come with us." She nodded, weary and broken. As she passed Clara, she whispered, "I never wished you harm, ma'am. I only wanted the truth." When the door closed behind her, the silence returned. That evening, as the police left the estate, Clara found Poirot standing by the garden gates. The fog had lifted, and the first hint of sunlight touched the horizon. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Poirot looked toward the manor. "Now, madam, you live. The past has done enough harm here. Let the house sleep." She nodded slowly. "You think forgiveness is possible?" Poirot smiled faintly. "It is always possible, but it seldom comes easily." He turned to leave, but Clara called after him. "Why did you come here, really? The colonel's letter, or something else?" Poirot paused. "The letter, yes, but also because I sensed a wound in this place, a wound disguised as love. Such wounds call to me. He tipped his hat and walked down the misty road, leaving Whitby Manor behind as the lights spread across the wet fields. Weeks later, the newspapers printed the story. Widow's second husband poisoned. Long-buried war secret revealed. The scandal faded as quickly as it had come. Mrs. Holloway was sentenced to a short term in prison, released for her age and ill health. She died quietly a year later. Clara sold Whitby Manor and moved to the coast, where the sea could drown out memories of thunder and gunfire. As for Poirot, he kept the blue locket on his desk for a time, a reminder that love, revenge, and truth are often written in the same ink. He would say later, with a touch of melancholy, "There are crimes born of greed and crimes born of hate, but the ones born of grief are the hardest to condemn." The rain began again outside his window, soft and patient. Poirot listened for a while, then reached for his hat. Somewhere, another mystery waited. And so ends another case for Hercule Poirot, the truth uncovered, yet peace forever stained by sorrow. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next time for another dark journey into the mind of England's greatest detective. Until then, keep your little gray cells sharp.